In the far future, the galaxy was not empty. It was full of powerful civilizations, ancient empires, and advanced species who had mastered space travel long before Earth even learned to fly planes. On the Galactic Council Station, thousands of alien species gathered every cycle to discuss wars, trade, and new discoveries. And today, Earth was on the agenda. A small blue planet appeared on the giant holographic screen in the center of the council hall. It looked peaceful. Oceans, clouds, green land, nothing special to the eyes of the galaxy. A voice echoed through the hall. Species classification, human beings. Planet, Earth. Technology level, low. Military strength, minimal. A few alien leaders started laughing. One of them, a tall insect-like commander with sharp glowing eyes, leaned forward. "This is the species that sent a message to us?" he asked. "Yes," the council computer replied. "They call themselves humans." The hall filled with soft laughter again. Another alien, covered in metal armor that looked like part of its body, spoke next. "They still use fossil fuel machines in some regions. They fight wars with outdated weapons. Why are we even discussing them?" The council leader raised a hand to silence them. "Because they requested recognition as a developing space civilization," he said calmly. The laughter became louder. A soft robotic voice from the data section added more information. "Human emotional behavior is unstable. They show high levels of fear, anger, and cooperation at the same time. Their survival rate in space conditions is extremely low." A pause filled the room. Then one council member said coldly, so in simple words, "They are weak." The word echoed, weak. The council accepted it instantly. There was no debate, no concern, no fear. Just classification. Humans were weak. Far away from that council station, in a different part of the galaxy, something moved silently through dark space. It was not a trading ship, not a diplomatic vessel. It was a fleet. A large shadow fleet, painted in dark metallic armor, almost invisible against the stars. Their engines made no sound. Their arrival was not announced. This was the Varelian Empire's exploration arm, and they had been watching Earth for months. On the command ship, Commander Varek stood in front of a large viewing window. His body was tall, armored, and cold in design. His eyes scanned the small planet below. "Target world confirmed," one officer reported. "Earth," Varek said slowly. "Yes, Commander." "Primitive civilization. No interstellar defense systems detected." Another officer added, "Their satellites are weak. Their communication signals are easy to decode. They are not even aware we are here." Varek stayed silent for a moment. He studied the planet carefully. Strangely, it did not feel dangerous. Not even slightly. There were cities glowing softly at night. Movement of life everywhere. But no shields, no war fleets, no planetary defense grid. It was like watching a child world playing under open sky. "Why are we here?" one junior officer asked. "To prepare for contact," Varex replied. A pause. Then another officer said something more direct. "Or conquest." Varex did not answer immediately. He looked at Earth again. "The Council will decide," he finally said. But deep inside, he already knew the answer. Earth had no chance. At that moment, on Earth, life continued normally. People went to work. Children went to school. Cities were busy. Oceans moved. Winds changed. Everything looked normal. No one knew that above them, thousands of kilometers in space, something huge was watching. Something that had destroyed planets before. In a small space monitoring station orbiting Earth, a junior human technician noticed strange readings on his screen. He frowned. "Sir, I think I'm seeing something unusual," he said. His supervisor walked over lazily. "What is it?" "There's a mass object, large group, but it's not showing normal heat signature." The supervisor looked at the screen. He paused, then laughed lightly. "Probably a sensor glitch, space dust interference." The junior technician didn't feel convinced, but he nodded anyway, because in his training manual, there was no section for unknown alien fleet hiding in shadow space. Above Earth, the Varelian fleet slowly adjusted its position. Commander Virex gave a final order: begin full observation phase. No contact yet. The ships moved silently, like dark ghosts in space. Below them, Earth kept shining peacefully, and no one knew that in just a few days, the galaxy would decide what humans really were: weak or something else entirely. And in the silence of space, the first countdown to humanity's future had already begun. Above Earth, the silence of space was not truly silent. Thousands of kilometers away from oceans and cities, the Varelian fleet slowly adjusted its position like a shadow spreading across the sky. The ships were massive, dark, and perfectly still, as if they were part of space itself. On the command vessel, Commander Virex stood in front of the main screen. Earth was still visible below, calm and aware. But that calm was about to end. An officer stepped forward. "Commander, planetary scan complete. No advanced defense systems detected. No space fleet. No planetary shields." Another officer added, "Their communication systems are primitive. We can control their satellites easily." Virex nodded slowly. Still, he did not relax. Something about Earth felt different. Not powerful, not advanced, just unpredictable. But the Council had already made its judgment. Humans were weak. And weak species did not survive first contact. A signal was sent from the Varelian fleet. It moved faster than light, reaching Earth's deep space communication network in seconds. In a small global space monitoring center on Earth, alarms suddenly flashed red. Technicians rushed to their stations. "Unknown signal detected," one shouted. "Source location?" another asked. The system processed for a moment. Then the answer appeared on screen. "Orbit region. Multiple large unidentified objects." The room went silent. One senior officer leaned closer. "Is it satellites? Debris?" A young technician shook his head slowly. "No, sir. It's too organized." Before anyone could respond, the main screen changed. A translation system activated automatically. A message appeared. "Earth civilization, you are now under observation." A heavy silence filled the room. Then the message continued. "You have 24 hours to accept outside control. Failure will result in planetary reset." No one spoke. The words were too clean, too direct, too final. One officer whispered, "Is this a joke?" But no one laughed. In the military command center of Earth, chaos started instantly. Emergency meetings were called. Generals gathered. Political leaders arrived in panic. Satellite feeds confirmed it. Something large was in orbit, and it was not human. Back on the Varelian command ship, Commander Virex observed everything carefully. "Human reaction?" he asked. A data officer replied, "Confusion." "Fear, no coordinated defense response," Virex nodded. "As expected." But then something unusual happened. One human signal appeared on the screen. It was not military, not government. It came from a single location, a small underground engineering facility. "Commander," the officer said, "we are receiving an internal human transmission." "Show it," Virex ordered. The screen changed. A human face appeared. A man in simple clothes, tired eyes, sitting in front of old computers and wires. He was not a soldier, not a leader, just an engineer. He spoke calmly. "This is Earth Response Team Alpha," he said. The Varelian officers looked confused. "Alpha? They are already naming resistance groups?" One muttered, but Virex stayed focused. The human continued. "We are receiving your message. We understand your demand." He paused, then added something strange. "But your system is not hidden well." Silence. On the command ship, officers looked at each other. "What does that mean?" one asked. The engineer continued. "You are using synchronized orbit positioning. Your fleet depends on a central coordination signal. If that signal is disrupted, your fleet will lose structure. The room on the Varelian ship went cold. One officer stepped forward quickly. That is impossible. They cannot detect that. Another officer checked the data. How would a primitive species know fleet synchronization theory? Virex narrowed his eyes for the first time. He felt something sharp in his mind. Curiosity. The human engineer leaned closer to his camera. "We are not strong like you," he said calmly. "But we notice patterns." Then the transmission ended. The screen went black. On Earth, the underground room was silent again. The engineer exhaled deeply. His hands were shaking slightly, but his eyes were focused. He turned to his small team. "They are listening now," he said. One of his teammates whispered, "Will they believe you?" The engineer looked at the broken screens, the wires, the outdated machines. "I don't need them to believe me," he said. "I just need them to hesitate." Above Earth, in orbit, the Varelian fleet remained still. For the first time since arrival, there was uncertainty. Commander Virex stared at Earth again, not as a weak world, but as something unpredictable, something that had noticed them. And in the silence of space, the first doubt about humanity had begun to grow. In orbit above Earth, silence had changed. It was no longer calm, it was uncertain. The Varelian fleet floated in perfect formation, but inside the command ship, something new had entered the room for the first time since their arrival over Earth. Doubt. Commander Virex stood still in front of the main holographic display. Earth rotated slowly below them, blue and peaceful, completely unaware of the tension building above it. The engineer's message replayed again in the system. "We notice patterns." Those words repeated in Virex's mind. An officer stepped forward. "Commander, it may be a bluff. Primitive species often guess randomly." Another officer added quickly, "They cannot understand fleet synchronization. It is too advanced." But the data technician interrupted. "Commander, there is something you should see." He displayed a hidden analysis screen. The system showed something unexpected. The human message had not been random. It matched a real weakness in the fleet's coordination structure. A small vulnerability in the Varelian Central Command signal. Not enough to destroy the fleet, but enough to disrupt timing. Enough to create chaos in battle conditions. A silence spread through the command room. One officer whispered, "How did they find that?" No one answered. Commander Virex turned away from the screen and looked at Earth again. For the first time, he studied it differently. Not as a weak world, but as a world that observed. Back on Earth, deep underground, the engineer was not celebrating. He was working faster. His name was Elias Mercer. He was not a soldier. Not a politician, not a hero. Just a systems engineer who worked in satellite repair and deep space communication research. But Elias had one unusual skill. He noticed patterns others ignored. For years he studied broken signals, failed satellite data, and strange space interference, while most people saw noise. He saw structure. Now, sitting in his underground facility, he looked at a wall filled with coded diagrams, connection maps, and signal traces. His team stood behind him quietly. One of them spoke softly. Did it work? Elias did not answer immediately. He was watching incoming data from orbit. Slowly he said, "They are thinking now. That was enough." Because thinking enemies were more dangerous than attacking ones. A junior analyst in his team asked nervously, "Are we really fighting them?" Elias shook his head. "No," he said. "We are surviving them." He pointed at a large map on the wall. It showed Earth surrounded by faint orbital points. Each point represented a Varelian ship. He continued, "They think they are invisible, but they are not. Their formation is too perfect, their movement too structured." He zoomed into a pattern on the screen. Every system that is too perfect has a weakness. His team listened carefully. Elias had spent months preparing for something no one believed would happen. First contact. but not peaceful contact. The kind that comes with control, domination, or extinction. He had no weapons, no army, only data and understanding. Above Earth, Commander Virex received another report. Commander, the human signal origin has been traced. Location? Virex asked. Subterranean structure, Eastern Continent region. A map appeared. A small hidden facility. No military marking, no government clearance level. No defense shield, just a single human point. Virex studied it closely. This is the one, he said quietly. The engineer. An officer stepped forward. Shall we eliminate the location? But Virex raised a hand. No, the room went silent. Virex stared at the image, one human. Understood our structure in minutes, he said slowly. That is not normal. Another officer replied, it could be luck. Virex shook his head. No, he said. Luck does not identify system weakness in synchronized fleets. He turned toward the tactical screen. For the first time, his voice changed. Observe him. Back underground, Elias suddenly paused. He felt something strange. Not a sound, not a signal, but attention. He looked at his screen. Incoming orbital activity. Had slowed. Not stopped, just careful. He exhaled slowly. They saw it, he said quietly. His team looked confused. What did they see? One asked. Elias stood up and walked toward the central console. He answered simply, the truth. Above Earth, the Varelian fleet did not move. For the first time since arriving, they were not preparing attack, they were studying. And in space, that was far more dangerous. Because when a predator stops moving, it is no longer hunting randomly, it is learning. And somewhere in the silence between Earth and orbit, a war that had not yet begun was already changing shape. Above Earth, the Varelian fleet no longer looked like a simple invasion force. It looked like a thinking shadow. Ships stayed in perfect formation, but their movement had changed. Slower, more careful, almost like they were watching something small. Something unpredictable. Commander Virex stood at the center of the command deck. The engineer on Earth was still on his mind. One human. No weapons, no fleet, no army. Yet he had done something no other primitive species had done before. He had made the Varelians hesitate. That alone was dangerous. An officer approached. Commander, Earth's global defense networks are responding now. Military activity is increasing. Virex nodded slightly. Show me. The holographic screen displayed Earth. Across the planet, human nations were waking up to the truth. Air bases were moving aircraft. Naval fleets were repositioning. Missile silos were being checked. Satellites were being reprogrammed. But it was chaos, not coordination. Different countries were not working together. Some believed it was a threat. Others thought it was a hoax. A few thought it was another nation's trick. Humans were reacting, but not as one. The officer reported again. Human command structure is fragmented. No unified defense system detected. Another officer added coldly. They will not organize in time. On Earth, panic was spreading. Cities saw strange news reports. Governments held emergency meetings. People looked at the sky at night, searching for something they could not see. But in orbit, the Varelian fleet had already moved beyond waiting. The Council's order was clear. If Earth resisted, it would be reset. And now resistance was increasing. Back in the underground facility, Elias Mercer was moving fast. His team was exhausted, but they continued working. The room was filled with screens showing orbital movement, signal maps, and interference patterns. Elias spoke calmly. They are preparing phase shift positioning. A technician asked, what does that mean? Elias replied, they are getting ready to surround Earth completely. A heavy silence filled the room. Another engineer asked quietly, can we stop them? Elias looked at the screen for a moment. Then he shook his head. No, he said. Not by force. He walked toward a table covered with hardware parts, signal chips, and old communication devices. But we can slow them. He picked up a small device, a signal injector prototype. Not powerful, not advanced, but precise. His team watched him carefully. One of them asked, "Is this enough?" Elias replied, "It does not need to be enough. It only needs to work once." Above Earth, things were changing fast. The Varelian fleet began its first real action. Not attack. Control. Small orbital strikes began targeting communication satellites, not destroying Earth directly, but isolating it. One by one, human satellites went offline. Global internet systems started failing in some regions. Communication networks became unstable. Air traffic control systems received interference. Emergency channels became noisy or blank. Earth was not being destroyed. It was being disconnected, slowly, systematically. Commander Varex watched it all. No emotion on his face. Just calculation. An officer reported, "Global communication stability reduced by 43%. Another added, "Satellite network collapse ongoing." Varex nodded. "Continue isolation." But then something unexpected happened. A new signal appeared, not from governments, not from military systems, but from deep underground again. Elias Mercer had sent another transmission. The Varelian technicians immediately flagged it. "Same human engineer," one said. "Intercept it," Varex ordered. The message opened on screen. Elias appeared again. But this time, his face was different. More focused, less calm. He spoke directly. "You are not attacking us," he said. "You are cutting us off." A pause. Then he continued, "But you made one mistake." On the Varelian ship, officers leaned closer. "What mistake?" One whispered. Elias looked directly into the camera. "You think silence means surrender." A few seconds passed. Then he added, "It does not." On Earth, something strange began to happen. Even as communication systems failed, small independent networks started activating. Old backup radios, emergency satellite relays, military analog systems, civil defense channels. Humans were adapting, not as one system, but as many small systems trying to survive. Commander Varex watched carefully. Something was shifting again. Not strength, not technology. Something else. Persistence. An officer spoke quietly. "Commander, they are rebuilding communication even while we block them." Another added, "It is not efficient, but it is continuous." Varex narrowed his eyes. That word again, continuous. He looked at Earth below. The planet was being isolated, but it was not becoming quiet. It was becoming determined. Back in the underground facility, Elias finally leaned back for a moment. His team looked exhausted. One of them asked, "Are we losing?" Elias did not answer immediately. He looked at the screen showing orbital positions. Then he said, "We are not in control of this war." A pause. Then he added, "But we are still in it." Above Earth, the Varelian fleet continued its silent operation. But for the first time, Earth was not just a target. It was a system refusing to shut down. And in space, that kind of system was the hardest to erase. In orbit above Earth, the silence had changed again. Now it was not uncertainty, it was planning. The Varelian fleet moved with precision across the sky, like a dark web tightening around a fragile world. Each ship held position in perfect coordination, cutting off communication routes, blocking escape signals, and controlling orbital space step by step. Earth below looked peaceful from space. But inside the planet, tension was growing fast. And in the underground facility, Elias Mercer was no longer just reacting. He was preparing. On the command ship, Commander Varex stood in front of the tactical display. Streams of data flowed across the screen. Earth's communication systems, satellite remnants, emergency signals, and military responses. An officer spoke. "Commander, Earth's global communication is now at critical failure level. Most satellite channels are offline." Another added, Their coordination ability is decreasing. Resistance is becoming local, not global. Varex nodded slowly. Good, he said. But his eyes stayed sharp. Because even now, Earth was still responding, not as one system, but as many small ones. And that was unusual. Back underground, Elias Mercer watched everything carefully. His screen showed orbital movement patterns of the Varelian fleet. He was not surprised anymore. He had predicted this stage. Isolation, cut communication, break coordination, divide response, a classic first contact domination strategy. But Elias had prepared for this exact scenario. He turned to his team. They think they are controlling us, he said quietly. A technician asked, aren't they? Elias shook his head. No, he replied. They are only controlling what we show them. He walked toward the central console. On it was a hidden system he had built over months. A false signal generator. A system designed to mimic Earth's remaining active networks. But it was not real. It was a trap. One of his engineers asked nervously, will they detect it? Elias answered calmly, they will not detect it at first. A pause, because it is designed to look like failure. He activated the system. Across Earth's orbit, small artificial signals began to appear, weak, broken, fragmented, just like collapsing human networks. On the Varelian command ship, alerts appeared instantly. Commander, an officer said, new signal activity detected. Varex turned. Source? The technician checked. Multiple points across Earth's remaining network systems. But they are unstable. Another officer added. It looks like a collapsing communication chain. Varex studied the data. It matched expectations. Earth's systems were breaking down, but something about it felt too clean, too evenly spread. He narrowed his eyes. Continue monitoring, he said. But in that moment, Elias's trap had already begun to take shape. The false signals were not meant to fool them forever. Only long enough for Varelian systems to connect to them. Because once they connected, they would open a path. Back underground, Elias watched carefully. His screen showed a subtle change. The Varelian fleet had begun scanning deeper into Earth's signal remnants. They were investigating the collapse. Exactly as expected. Elias spoke softly. They are curious now. A technician asked, is that good? Elias did not smile. It is necessary. Above Earth, Varex gave an order. Analyze the signal fragments. Identify if there is residual command structure. The fleet obeyed. Advanced scanners began locking onto Earth's artificial signals. Slowly, Varelian systems started syncing with them. Just to observe. Just to understand. But that was the opening Elias needed, because hidden inside those signals was a carefully embedded code structure. Not aggressive, not obvious. Just waiting. Back on Earth, small emergency stations began noticing unusual behavior in their backup systems. One technician frowned. Sir, our emergency relays are responding on their own. Another checked the logs. That's impossible. They are offline. But the system continued responding. Not controlled by Earth, but influenced by something else. Back in space, Varex received another report. Commander, we are now inside their signal remnants. A pause. We are observing full structural collapse patterns. Varex nodded. Proceed deeper. But one officer hesitated. Commander, should we be cautious? This may be a trap. Varex turned slightly. A trap requires intent, he said. These are primitives under pressure. They are breaking. And so the fleet moved deeper into Earth's signal network, unknowingly stepping closer to Elias's design. Inside the underground facility, Elias watched everything carefully. His hands were steady now. This is the moment, he said quietly. One of his team asked, now? Elias nodded. Not yet. A pause. Let them enter fully. Because the trap was not in the signal. The trap was in the connection. Above Earth, The Varelian fleet continued its scan, deeper, closer, until finally, their systems linked fully with Earth's false network core, and in that instant, Elias pressed a single command. On every screen in the underground facility, one word appeared, connected and above Earth, for the first time. The hunters had stepped into the net. In orbit above Earth, something changed inside the Varelian fleet. At first, it was small, almost unnoticeable. A delay in response time, a slight mismatch in coordination signals, a tiny hesitation between command and execution. But in a system built on perfect timing, even a small delay was dangerous. Commander Varex noticed it immediately. His eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical screen. "Report," he ordered. An officer checked the data. "Commander, we are experiencing minor synchronization disruption." Another officer quickly added, "It is within acceptable limits. Could be signal noise from Earth remnants." But Varex did not look convinced. He turned toward the main display. Earth's signal network was still showing collapse patterns. Fragmented communication, broken transmission lines. Exactly what they had expected, yet something felt wrong, too controlled, too predictable. Back underground, Elias Mercer stood still in front of his central console. His team was silent. The system had been activated. Now they could only watch. A technician whispered, "Did it work?" Elias did not answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the data streams flowing across the screen. Then he said softly, "They are inside now." A pause, and now they are inside each other. Above Earth, Varelian systems began deeper analysis of the captured signal network. At first, it seemed like a simple collapsed communication structure. But as their systems integrated further, something unexpected happened. The network responded. Not like broken infrastructure, but like an active system, one designed to react. An officer spoke quickly, "Commander, the signal structure is adapting to our analysis." Another looked confused. "That is not possible." "It is supposed to be inactive." Varex stepped closer. "Show me full internal mapping." The screen expanded. What they saw made the room quiet. The Varelian fleet's synchronization nodes were now partially linked to Earth's false network core. But instead of controlling it, they were being mirrored by it. It was as if Earth's system was learning them back, slowly, quietly. A junior officer stepped back. "Commander, this feels like—" He stopped. Varex finished the sentence. "A trap." Silence filled the command deck. Back on Earth, Elias finally moved. He turned to his team. "Phase 2 is active," he said. One of the engineers asked, "What does Phase 2 do?" Elias replied calmly, "It removes their advantage." He pointed at the screen. "They rely on synchronization across fleets. If even a small part of their system starts reacting unpredictably," he paused, "everything slows." Another technician asked, "Can it affect the whole fleet?" Elias nodded slightly. "If they are connected enough." Above Earth, the Varelian fleet began showing increasing anomalies. Not full system failure, not destruction, but confusion in timing. One ship reacted half a second late. Another adjusted position incorrectly. A third received delayed command signals. It was small, but it spread. Commander Varex saw it clearly now. This was not random. He turned sharply, "Disconnect from Earth signal core immediately." But it was too late. The connection had already propagated through multiple layers of their fleet synchronization system. An officer shouted, "Commander, we are losing clean separation control." Another added, "Fleet coordination is degrading across multiple units." Varex's expression hardened. "Cut all external links now." But the system resisted, not because of enemy fire, but because the link had already integrated too deeply into their own processing layer. Back underground, Elias watched everything with calm focus. His team was tense. One of them asked, "Is it spreading?" Elias answered, "Yes." A pause, but slowly. Above Earth, the once perfect Varelian formation began to show slight imperfections. Small misalignments in orbital positioning, tiny errors in timing sequences, minor communication delays, but in a fleet that depended entirely on synchronization. These small errors were not small at all. Commander Virex clenched his fist. "This is not Earth's collapse," he said slowly. "This is interference." An officer looked at him. "Commander, from where?" Virex stared at the screen. And for the first time since arriving over Earth, he had no immediate answer. Because the interference was not coming from weapons, not from satellites, not from an army. It was coming from understanding. From a single human who had studied their structure long enough to reshape it from inside. Back on Earth, Elias finally spoke again. "They are not losing the war yet," he said. "But they are no longer in full control of it." A technician asked quietly, "Then who is?" Elias looked at the screen showing orbit above Earth and said simply, "No one." A pause. Now it is reaction versus reaction. Above Earth, the fleet that once believed in perfect control was beginning to experience something it had never faced before. Not destruction, not resistance, but imbalance, and in space. Imbalance spreads faster than fire. Above Earth, the Varelian fleet was no longer perfect. For the first time in its history, the great war machine of the Empire was showing small cracks in its unity, not from damage, not from weapons, but from confusion inside its own system. Every ship was still powerful, every weapon still ready, but coordination was breaking. Commander Virex stood in silence at the center of the command deck. The holographic display in front of him flickered slightly as data streams tried to stabilize. He did not speak at first, because for the first time since the invasion began, he was not fully in control of his fleet. An officer broke the silence. "Commander, synchronization error has increased to critical levels." Another added quickly, "Multiple fleet sections are desinced. Response delays are spreading." Virex finally spoke. "Isolate infected nodes." The technician shook his head. "Already attempted." "The interference is not localized anymore." A heavy silence followed. Back underground on Earth, Elias Mercer stood still in front of his console. His team watched him carefully. No one spoke. On the screen, the Varelian fleet movements were now slightly unstable, not collapsing, not destroyed, but no longer perfectly aligned. Elias finally exhaled. "They are reacting to themselves now," he said quietly. A technician asked, "Does that mean we won?" Elias shook his head. "No," he said. "It means they are confused." A pause. "And confused enemies are dangerous." Above Earth, something very important was happening. The Varelian Supreme Command Ship, the center of all coordination, began receiving conflicting internal reports. One section reported Earth was fully controlled. Another reported communication collapse was incomplete. Another warned of internal synchronization failure. The system that was once absolute was now contradicting itself. Commander Virex stepped forward. "Stop all offensive operations," he ordered, but the response was delayed. For half a second, then one ship responded incorrectly, then another. Then a chain reaction of misaligned actions spread across multiple fleet sections. It was not chaos yet, but it was no longer order. Virex turned sharply. "This is not possible," he said quietly. An officer replied, "Commander, the system is reacting to internal feedback loops from the Earth signal integration." Virex paused. Then he understood, not fully, but enough. The trap was not about destroying their fleet. It was about making their own system uncertain. Back on Earth, Elias watched the final phase begin. He turned to his team. "They are now seeing themselves through our signal mirror," he said. A technician asked, "What does that mean?" Elias answered simply, "It means they cannot tell what is real anymore." Above Earth, the Varelian fleet suddenly received a new transmission. It was not from Earth governments. It was not from military systems. It was from Elias Mercer again, but this time, it was different. The message was broadcast across all captured channels, even partially unstable ones. Elias appeared on the screen once more. Calm, tired, but focused. "You came here thinking we were weak," he said. His voice was steady. "You were not wrong about our technology." A pause. "But you were wrong about everything else." On the command deck, Virex watched closely. The transmission continued. "You thought control was enough to win a war," Elias said. "But control fails when the system you enter can reflect you back." The officers looked confused. One whispered, "Reflect?" Elias continued, "You are not fighting Earth anymore." A pause. "You are fighting your own structure inside Earth." Silence filled the Varelian command ship. Then Elias said the final line. "And now you understand us, just a little too late." The transmission ended. On Earth, systems stabilized again. Not fully restored, but no longer under full alien dominance. Above Earth, the fleet was still powerful, still dangerous, but no longer unified. Commander Virex looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. "Cancel planetary reset." The officers turned in shock. "Commander?" Virex did not look away from Earth. "This is no longer a simple invasion," he said. "This is something new." He paused. "A species that does not need to match strength to stop it." Back on Earth, people began noticing something strange. Alien signals were no longer advancing. Satellite interference slowly decreased. Emergency systems started stabilizing. No one understood why. But something outside their world had paused. And in that pause, humanity still existed, not as the strongest, not as the most advanced, but as something the galaxy had not expected. A species that could not be easily erased. In orbit, the Varelian fleet slowly held position, not retreating, not attacking, just watching. Because for the first time in their history, they had encountered a war they did not fully understand. And across the galaxy, word would soon spread. Not of a conquered Earth, but of a human who turned silence into resistance and made an empire hesitate in space.